Hello, and welcome back to History for the HSC, where today we ask the question, who were the Nazis? That is, who were the key individuals involved in the leadership of the state of Nazi Germany? So please join us on our next deep dive into the power and authority topic for your HSC Modern History course. Now, it has been a little while since our last video, but we are going to continue on in the same sort of pattern that we've been working before. Today, our syllabus stop points will be the following: the rise of the Nazi Party and Hitler in Germany and the collapse of the Weimar Republic, specifically looking at Hitler there as one of the key Nazis. Our main focus, however, is on this second dot point, the role of prominent individuals in the Nazi state. A few things to note here. Most recently, this dot point was used as the extended response question in the 2021 HSC Modern History paper, asking about the role of prominent individuals in the Nazi state in terms of ideology. Now, one thing to notice about the way the syllabus outcome is worded, it is individuals, that is plural. They're not named, however. The only single Nazi that could be asked a question on using their explicit name is Hitler, which is why we've included the dot point on him, and why we'll be discussing him a little bit when we're talking about who were the Nazis. What I would suggest is that you know obviously the role of Hitler, because it is so crucial to everything else that you've done in this topic in terms of ideology and the cult of personality. But also you pick two other Nazis that you really want to know well. And today we're going to have a bit of a look over some of the key individuals that you should really look to know and see how they link in with other parts of the syllabus. So let's get started. So today we will be thinking about a few key Nazis. The first, obviously, is Adolf Hitler himself. We looked at him quite a lot in a lot of different other topics, and we'll just be really going a quick, brief summary of his involvement in the Nazi Party. The second key individual in the Nazi state worth paying some attention to is Hermann Goering. We'll also spend some time looking at the person of Joseph Goebbels. Beyond them, looking at Ernst Röhm, leader of the SA, involved in the early part of Nazi rule, before lastly moving on to Heinrich Himmler, leader of the SS, architect of the final solution. These are the five Nazis that I have chosen. There are, of course, other key individuals in the Nazi state that you could use. These five gentlemen, however, I think give a good kind of overview and link very well into other key areas of content that you really do need to know. So let's get started with Hitler. Hitler was, without any doubt, the key individual involved in the Nazi state, and any discussion of prominent individuals could not really be complete without at least a consideration of his role. We have discussed this at length through the videos we've already published, and we'll continue to discuss it in more length in videos that are to come. So today we're not really aiming to have a fully detailed discussion of the ins and outs of Hitler's role in the Nazi state, but really just a few points that are worth considering. Firstly, we do need to consider what role Hitler actually played. Following the death of Hindenburg in 1934, Hitler had become the undisputed leader of Germany. No longer chancellor or president, he was the Führer, the leader, as designated by the law concerning the highest state office of the Reich, holding the position of both head of state and head of the government. Hitler ruled Germany as a dictator, as somebody with undisputed and essentially limitless power. This, of course, as we know, formed a key tenet of Nazi ideology, the Führer principle. Remember that the Nazis believed that Hitler ruled benevolently, that his will was the will of Germany. And whilst many of the leaders we'll look at today might have actually held opposing views at times, and even wanted to oppose Hitler at times, all the men in this list obeyed him basically unquestioningly. Hans Frank, a longtime member of the Nazi Party, who had taken part in the Beer Hall Putsch, who had served as Hitler's private lawyer, and had been named Nazi governor of Poland during the war, put it this way: our constitution is the will of the Führer. It was Hitler's regime, Hitler's policy, Hitler's victory, and Hitler's defeat, nothing else. Now, like many of the other captured Nazi leaders after the war, Frank did really attempt to distance himself from the regime's atrocities whilst at the Nuremberg trials. So it is important to understand that this quote does not limit his blame. It tells us, yes, of the undisputed power of Hitler, but does not eliminate the blame of Frank or any of the other key Nazis in the atrocities of the Nazi regime. As the Nuremberg trials would eventually articulate, following orders was not a reasonable defense. It is, however, clear that Hitler was ultimately responsible, that everyone in Germany, in whatever position, was ultimately answerable to Hitler. Now, despite this, his leadership of the party has repeatedly been described as haphazard, as chaotic, with no clear direction, and an expectation that his subordinates would kind of read between the lines and act as he wanted. Now, there's some disagreement on why the Nazi regime operated in such a manner, with a willingness to allow party members to backstab each other, to encourage leading Nazis to engage in political infighting. Norman Rich argues that Hitler deliberately created political chaos. He wanted to keep his minions on their toes, forever guessing what his ultimate goal was, forever wondering if they had his support or not, and in this way he could control them. It's also possible that this leadership style fostered political competition between the leading Nazis, with everyone vying for Hitler's attention, and that in this it reflected their ideology of social Darwinism and the survival of the fittest. The fittest will rise to the top in the Nazi Party as well. However, other historians are less accepting of this particular view. Hans Mommsen argues that the chaos of the Nazi political system reflected both the legacy of the past, which is the Weimar government, the series of coalition governments that were ruled by Article 42, along with the chaotic history of the party itself, and coupled with Hitler's own general disinterest and laziness when it came to many key aspects of his rule. Whatever the case is, though, Hitler had a role in the leadership of the Nazi state in every way, from his political leadership to deciding tactics during the war, tactics that would make or break the war. And as his rule went on, he seemed increasingly unwilling to listen to the advice from anyone, leading to a series of inept military decisions and speeding on the demise of his Third Reich. Next, we come to think about Hermann Goering, the fighter pilot and World War I hero turned poster boy for National Socialism and for Aryan values. It's pretty hard to really pin down exactly what his role was in the Nazi state. To summarize it in a quick way, perhaps it's best described as Hitler's second. Goering had joined the Nazi Party relatively early on. Hearing a speech of Hitler in 1922, he was immediately entranced and attracted to the man and to the mission of German greatness and the power that would come with it. Goering himself doesn't seem to have held the same ideological belief of the Nazi Party. In his own words, I joined the party because I was a revolutionary, not because of any ideological nonsense. Now, again, we do need to be somewhat skeptical about how much of this is true. How much Goering, in saying this after the war, whilst in captivity, was actually trying to avoid blame and perhaps even seek a lighter sentence. It's possible that he was a true believer in Nazism and he's lying here. It's also possible that he merely saw Nazis as a tool for his own personal power and glory. I tend to think the latter is the case. However, either way, his actions certainly contributed to the worst of what the Nazis did. Regardless, Hitler recognized Goering's potential, and he put him immediately in charge of the brown shirts. Goering found success working to professionalize what was essentially at that time a rabble or an armed mob. He would be made lieutenant general in the brown shirts, a position he would retain up until 1945. Hitler believed that Goering was one of the most successful, if not the most successful man in carrying out his mission of coordinating the SA. Hitler commented this: "I liked him. I made him the head of my SA. He's the only one of its heads that ran the SA properly. I gave him a disheveled rabble. In a very short time, he'd organized a division of 11,000 men." As the leader of the brown shirts, Goering would take part in the failed Beer Hall Putsch, and like Hitler, he was also shot. However, unlike Hitler, he was successfully able to escape and evade capture, smuggled away to Austria, where he would receive the surgery that would ultimately save his life, but leave him with a crippling morphine addiction. He would remain here in Austria in exile until an amnesty was declared for his role in the failed takeover, returning to Germany in 1927. In the May 1928 elections to the Reichstag, he was elected as one of the only 12 Nazi members of the new Reichstag group. This was a position he would continue to hold throughout both the Weimar period and in the Nazi regime itself. By July 1932, as we know, the Nazi Party won the most seats, and Goering would be elected to the position of President of the Reichstag, effectively the Speaker of the House, which gave him some powers of enabling and preventing others from speaking. Now, as mentioned before, it's really difficult to pin down one single role Goering had during the Nazi state, as Hitler seemed to flood the man with different postings. He may have been responsible for the Reichstag fire, as William L. Schreier argues, concocting a plan to encourage other parties to vote for the Enabling Act. Goering himself would deny any involvement in that plot. He was certainly one of the only 3 Nazi members of the original Hitler cabinet in 1933, and whilst initially was a minister without portfolio, would later be made Minister of the Interior of Prussia, giving him command of the police. In fact, the point of him being made Minister without portfolio shows how powerful he was in the Nazi state, the Nazi Party at that time. He's one of the 2 men that Hitler wants in a government with him, and he doesn't even technically have a job to do. Goering would take over from Schacht as the man in charge of rebuilding the German economy in 1936, given the task of embarking on a 4-year plan to rebuild and ready the nation for the war to come. His economic prowess, according to many, was severely lacking, and it was actually this incompetence, more than anything else, that pushed Schacht away from the Nazis more than his ideological concerns and the treatment of minorities. In 1933, he created the Gestapo, the secret police, in his role as Minister for the Interior of Prussia, a force that would later be passed on to Himmler. And beyond this, in 1938, he'd been present at a meeting of key Nazis in the lead up to the Kristallnacht pogrom that many argue began the Holocaust in Germany. In a tape recording played at his trial, Goering could be heard plotting to use this event in order to seize Jewish property. In September 1939, Goering was designated as Hitler's successor, a position he would continue to hold until April 1945. He was named commander of the Luftwaffe, or the Air Force, and he found great success in the use of the Blitzkrieg tactics to defeat France, a victory that would see him named Reichsmarschall, placing him in full military command over any and all of the German Army, Navy, or Air Force. But as the war dragged on and his Air Force was less and less successful in its battle against the Allies, Goering retreated further and further from the halls of power in the Nazi state. By late 1944, with the Allied bombing of German cities well and truly at work, Hitler had pretty much lost faith in the man who had been his favored deputy. From here on, Goering would remain largely apart from key decision-making in the Reich. On the 22nd of April, 1945, Goering received a telegram from Hitler stating that he intended to commit suicide. With the Russian troops already in Berlin, the war was over. Goering replied and asked Hitler's permission to take command of Germany in order to negotiate a surrender, a treaty, a truce with the Allies. Hitler, however, considered this treason, and Goering was unceremoniously removed from all positions he held within the party, and his arrest was ordered. He'd soon be captured by American soldiers and held for trial. Throughout the years of Nazi rule, Goering was really never far from the top, and whilst he would deny any involvement in the Holocaust and amongst other claims, this was not accepted by the post-war trials. He was found guilty of war crimes by the Nuremberg trials and sentenced to death. The judges would say Goering was, indeed almost always, the moving force, second only to his leader. Goering was found guilty and sentenced to death. He would ask to be shot like a soldier, a request that would be denied. He would be hanged instead. However, Goering committed suicide using a cyanide capsule that had been snuck into his cell the night before his sentence would be carried out. The next individual worth considering is, of course, Joseph Goebbels. And he's especially important to think about in terms of how the Nazis used propaganda as a means of control and the impact that this had on the people of Germany. This is, of course, because Goebbels held the Nazi cabinet level position of Reich Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. The fact that this was such a high-level position within the party and within the nation demonstrates the importance that the Nazis place on propaganda as a means to control and indoctrinate their people, and Goebbels was the man responsible. He had joined the party following the failed Beer Putsch. The nationwide media attention that Hitler's trial drew and Hitler's ability to speak freely about his ideological beliefs at his trial convinced Goebbels to join the party. He was drawn to Hitler's charisma, his strength of conviction, because Goebbels at the time really lacked any sort of clear focus. He did have some leanings toward anti-Semitism, though this was not fully developed and did in no way match the later vitriol that would define his propaganda for the Nazi Party. He had read widely from the works of Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto, but also works into the Völkisch nationalism movement. The Völkisch nationalism movement that Nazism itself had sprung from. In effect, Goebbels was somewhat lost. He was looking for somebody to follow, for meaning and purpose in his life. And at that moment, Hitler provided that to him. In the words of Doris Bergen, Goebbels' extensive diaries reveal him to have been a true believer, committed to Hitler as a person, and to the realization of his ideas. And this is something that would really not change from the moment he heard Hitler speak at his trial until the day he died. From 1926 onwards, Goebbels took control of Nazi Party propaganda, recognizing how it could be used to control public opinion. His job as the leader of party propaganda was to distill the Nazi ideology and its message into simple ideas and concepts that the public could accept. In his own words, if you tell a lie big enough and keep on repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. Once the Nazis had consolidated power in 1933 to 34, his role of party propagandist would become that of propaganda for the whole country. In this, he built Hitler's popularity through the Führer principle and the cult of personality. Unlike other key leaders in Nazi Germany, Goebbels held a true background in academia, developing his doctoral thesis on literature. And he used this ability and this education in a clever way to target the different social and cultural and economic groups within Germany with their own specific message in the propaganda that he created. Unlike many of the other key Nazis, people like Goering and Himmler, he was not really ever considered to be a potential successor to Hitler. However, he did enjoy Hitler's complete confidence. According to John Gunther, he was the cleverest of all Nazis, but could not succeed Hitler because everybody hates him. Even as the war raged on and Nazi defeat became inevitable, Goebbels continued in his role as propagandist. Although his messages took on an increasingly negative tone, calling the German people to fight to the death for their Führer, his messages never stopped. And Goebbels would stay with Hitler until the bitter end. He and his wife Magda would commit suicide following Hitler's death. They would kill their own children with cyanide and morphine. Neither of them was willing to live in a world without Hitler and without Nazism. It would be a mistake to think that Goebbels did not hold some differences of opinion to Hitler. We know, for example, that particularly earlier on, he leaned more towards the socialist aspect of the National Socialist movement. However, that changed as Hitler came to more and more power within the party. At times, Goebbels did attempt to convince the Führer to take certain actions. However, he, like so many other leaders of Nazi Germany, feared to disobey Hitler in any way, and perhaps more than any other, he idolized this man who had given him purpose. Goebbels knew the lies that his propaganda was spreading, but so all-encompassing was his belief in Hitler, his fear of Hitler, that he supported Hitler's vision wholeheartedly. As the historian Heinz Goering comments, he was certainly in a position to recognize the errors and the weaknesses of the National Socialist system, but he lacked the courage necessary to lay his knowledge before Hitler. In Hitler's presence, he, like Goering and Himmler, was a little man. He both feared and idolized him. It is perhaps ironic that the man most associated with Nazi propaganda was the man who was most taken in by the same propaganda that he produced. The next key figure in Nazi Germany that we need to consider is Ernst Röhm, Hitler's close friend, a man allowed to call him by his name and by a nickname, in fact, Addy, but a man who ultimately would be mercilessly turned on when it was required by Hitler. Röhm held the position of commander and co-founder of the Sturmabteilung, the Storm Detachment, the SA, the Brown Shirts. Röhm had joined the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, this precursor to the Nazi Party, at around the same time as Hitler, and was instrumental in bringing support from many current and former members of the army to the Nazi cause. By 1923, he led the SA detachments that participated in the Beer Hall Putsch, And during this attempted coup, he and his men occupied the War Ministry, barricading himself and his forces inside. And it was this group of men that Hitler, Ludendorff, and the others were, theoretically at least, marching towards to rescue when they were fatefully shot at. Rohm would be placed on trial alongside the others who were also captured during the putsch. Whilst he would be found guilty of treason, he would receive a much lighter sentence of probation, for only a short period of time. Between 1923 and 1930, Rohm was largely absent from Germany, spending some time in Bolivia before being asked to return to Germany and to take on the role of leader of the SA once again by Hitler. Rohm began to appoint new leaders to this organization, removed a lot of the oversight from the main body of the Nazi Party over the SA. And by this point, the brown shirts came to number over 1 million men largely loyal to Rohm. Rohm made no secret about his desire that the SA replace the army within Germany. And it was this, more than anything else, that really drove a wedge between him and Hitler. As Shira puts it, the views of Hitler and Rohm were irreconcilable. And from the summer of 1933 to June 30 of the following year, a struggle, literally to the death, was to be fought between these two veterans of the Nazi movement, who were also close friends. This would, of course, culminate in the Night of Long Knives, a key aspect of Hitler's consolidation of power that we looked at in another video. Rohm and many of his high-ranking SA leaders were invited to a conference at a hotel in Bad Weisse. There, Himmler and Goering would orchestrate the plan that would end in Rohm's death and the decapitation of the leadership within the brown shirts. Evidence was planted to suggest that Rohm was part of a plot to kill Hitler and to overthrow the regime. Evidence of his homosexuality and the homosexuality of many of the leaders of the SA was made public as further evidence of his supposed debauchery. But even at this point, Hitler still struggled to pull the final trigger. And supposedly, when confronted by the SS men who were tasked with killing him, Rohm exclaimed, "If I am to be killed, let Adolf do it himself." Now, this request would not be honored, and Rohm would find his end in a prison cell, shot by the very party that he had helped to build. The day after the Night of Long Knives, the Nazis would legitimize the murders, issuing the law regarding the measures of state self-defense. It stated, "The Reich government has decided upon the following law, is herewith announced. The measures taken on June 30, July 1 and 2, 1934, in order to put down attacks of high treason shall be legal state defense." And so, with a stroke of a pen by Hitler and his supporters, Rohm's death and the death of many SA leaders was legitimized. The SA, and Rohm in particular, had helped to build the party, but both the SA and Rohm outlived their usefulness to the Nazi government soon after coming to power. And so our final key Nazi to be aware of is Heinrich Himmler, who held the position of Reichsführer of the Schutzstaffel, or the SS, and the Chief of Police. Himmler had joined the party in August 1923 and quickly became involved in the brown shirt movement under Rohm. As a member of the SA, he would take part in the beer hall putsch in November that year. However, he would be released without charge due to a lack of evidence. By 1925, he had joined the newly formed SS, which at this point was only a part of the larger brown shirt movement. His organizational abilities and his development of an organized bureaucracy within the SS saw his power grow and his recognition within the party grow, and gradually he would be promoted to higher and higher positions within the group. By January 1929, Himmler had been promoted to the position of Reichsführer of the SS, in charge and command of the whole organization, and he quickly grew the group from only 290 men to around 3,000 the following year. With the Nazis growing in popularity, Himmler would find himself elected to the Reichstag by September 1930. And by 1933, Himmler had successfully grown the SS into a group of around about 52,000 loyal men who were spread across a variety of different departments, reflecting again his organizational ability. Following the Reichstag fire in March 1933, Himmler set up the first concentration camp in Dachau near Munich. At this point, it would hold largely communist deputies, which enabled the Nazis to begin consolidating their powers. However, this camp, like many others, would later come to hold other victims of the Nazi Holocaust and Nazi regime in general. In April 1934, Goering handed control of the Gestapo to Himmler. This was done in an effort to sort of counteract the influence of Röhm and the brown shirts. It was hoped that Himmler, being in command of the SS and the Gestapo, could act as a sort of counterpoint to Röhm's influence. By this point, the SS had evolved as a separate force from the Röhm's brown shirts. But the brown shirts, the SA, were increasingly, as we know, causing a concern for Hitler and other members of Hitler's inner circle. Hitler feared that Röhm might desire to replace him as Führer. Hitler feared Röhm's clear desire to replace the army. Himmler and Goering saw that this was a chance to act against Röhm, potentially bringing more power to themselves. And Himmler in particular was instrumental in convincing Hitler of the need to purge the SA in the Night of Long Knives. It was Himmler who concocted the dossier of fake evidence of the supposed brown shirt plot and the money from Paris. It was Himmler who drew up the list of those who were to be killed. And it was Himmler's SS who carried out the murders. With control over the SS and the Gestapo in his pocket, Himmler would come to control the Nazi apparatus of terror and repression. As the historian Richard Evans puts it, coercion was at least as important as propaganda in its impact on the behavior of the vast majority of people who lived in Nazi Germany. We cannot underestimate how important Himmler's use of terror and repression through the Gestapo and the SS was in retaining Hitler and Nazi control over Germany. As the Nazis came to fully consolidate their rule and power over Germany, Himmler would come to control their most gruesome activities: the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing squads, the camps, the gas chambers, the ghettos, all run by the SS under Himmler. It is for this reason that Himmler has been called the architect of the final solution. With his control over the instruments of terror in Nazi Germany complete, Himmler was effectively able to control the German people. Most historians believe that the Nazi Party and their policies were not necessarily hugely popular with a large number of people, but fear kept them in line. In Himmler's own words, the best political weapon is the weapon of terror. Cruelty commands respect. Men may hate us, but we don't ask for their love, only their fear. And it was this fear that Himmler sought to create in Germany. Hitler found in Himmler a man of unquestioned loyalty. Although he was pedantic, dogmatic, and dull, Himmler emerged under Hitler as a second in actual power. His strength lay in the combination of unusual shrewdness, burning ambition, and servile loyalty to Hitler. Hitler held the utmost trust in Himmler and in Himmler's loyalty. Like many others, This trust, however, would be shaken. It would be broken as the war ended, and Himmler would be found to be attempting to negotiate with the Allies. Hitler would fly into a rage, much like he had with Goering. Himmler would be stripped of all positions, declared a traitor, just as Goering had been. And following Hitler's death, Himmler would attempt to escape. He would be captured and interrogated by the Allies before committing suicide with a cyanide pill in May 1945. This has been History for the HSC and our latest deep dive into the power and authority topic. This week we've come to know 5 key Nazis just perhaps a little bit better than we would have liked. Next time we're going to start moving on to the methods of control in the Nazi state. Be aware that from this point on, our upload schedule will probably slow down quite considerably as these videos are taking quite a long time to research and produce. Don't forget that you can download this end screen as opposed to using the links in the description below. There are links on the screen now to other videos that you might like to watch as well. So until next time though, keep studying.